The year was 1905 and there was a pending war in Europe. Brothers Harold and Alfred Harmsworth were looking for an alternate site to produce newsprint for his family papers back in England. They decided on a site in the Exploits Valley, and construction soon began on a pulp and paper mill in the former town of Grand Falls. As construction of the mill grew, so did the workforce and the need for more medical services. By late 1906, Dr. Harry Chamberlain arrived in Grand Falls, soon to be followed by classmate Dr. Walter Scott. In 1907, a small wooden clinic was constructed. Just off High Street behind the current post office, it contained a cot and an examining machine, far from being a hospital. As time went on, the town started to take shape with a growing influx of people and the need for a proper hospital and services. On October the 8th, 1909, during a celebration marking the completion of the mill, Lord Northcliffe made a donation of $10,000, a gift from his wife to be used to build a hospital. The hospital would be known as the Lady Northcliffe Hospital. The first hospital would have 9 beds. Mrs. Gilmore would become its first matron. Dr. Chamberlain would become its first doctor. Dr. Forbes Brown would arrive in Grand Falls in 1924 to work for the A&D Company and at Lady Northcliffe Hospital. He would remain here until 1974. He would become the first medical director of the newly opened Central Newfoundland Hospital in 1963. In 1913, Lady Northcliffe brought X-ray services to the hospital. By 1938, the hospital had expanded to 21 beds with both private and semi-private rooms. The Lady Northcliffe Hospital would serve the central area for 53 years. On December 9, 1958, a committee was formed and met with government officials. 1 week later, a deal was struck between government officials, townspeople, workers, and the company to construct a new hospital. The company's share would be $160,000. Within days, the company, its workers, and townspeople would raise over $686,000. What part did the A&D Company, Abitibi Consolidate, Abitibi Price play in the development of healthcare in Grand Falls, Windsor, and Central Newfoundland?
Well, Northcliffe's dream was to build a very profitable and successful pulp and paper business. But in order to do that, he had to build a town. He had to attract the investment to build both the town and the paper mill. And it was seen at the time as being a very bold adventure. But once that dream was realized, the ingredients of investment, a strong education system, a very strong healthcare system in order to sustain a community was established. Obviously, there was no major hospital here at the turn of the century when the industry was created. So over time, Northcliffe attracted healthcare and educational professionals to come to Grand Falls, a company-owned town, to lay the cornerstone for a successful future. And he was successful in doing that. Homes were made available to education and healthcare professionals. And eventually, over time, the Lady Northcliffe Hospital was established. And at that time, it was one of the finest healthcare facilities in the province. So once the community, once the industry was established, the key then was to maintain services throughout. Over time again, the Lady Northcliffe Hospital outgrew itself, and by the early 60s it was evident that a new larger healthcare facility needed to be established. And the company did pledge to build that facility. A committee was struck under the chairmanship of Clifford Bond. Mr. Bond was the chief financial officer of the company in Grand Falls at the time. And together with the joint mill unions, Ron Smith Sr. was very much involved with the joint mill unions. And together the company and its employees pledged thousands of dollars to build a new healthcare facility here. And that money was raised in a very short period of time. Money was actually taken from the paychecks of employees and with other donations from the business community and other individuals in the town. The company matched the money that was raised, and in short order they partnered with the government to complete what is now the Central Newfoundland Regional Healthcare Facility.
What role did the company play in the development of the South and Central Health Foundation?
Well, as time progressed, the company in the 60s moved away from being a company-run town, and they turned the business of the community over to its citizens, and Walter Tucker became the first mayor. So the town progressed relatively well in those early days, with a strong commitment from the company in a lot of areas. But in the 80s, the South and Central Health Foundation was established, and once the foundation was established, the paper company came on board with a major pledge of $650,000 over a 5-year period. The interesting thing, of course, about that $650,000 pledge is that over the period of that 5 years, the company went through a depression in the newsprint business. It went from being profitable in the first year of that pledge to being not profitable in the second and third years, and then eventually returned to profitability again. So the newsprint cycle was very much evident in the early 80s, and but it didn't affect the company's commitment to fund healthcare. I can remember quite well that presentation in the boardroom office in Toronto at the time. Don Keats was the CEO of Central Health. Walt Arnold was the foundation representative, and Bill Hanlon was the chair of the foundation board at that time. And they gave a very strong presentation to the company as to how they could spend wisely that $650,000 pledge money. And their presentation was quite successful, and I think it forged and cemented a very strong partnership between the paper industry and healthcare in this region. And that partnership has existed for a very long time, from the early days of Northcliffe to where we are today. Unfortunately, the company isn't here now, but they did lay the cornerstone for a very strong healthcare system. But the other thing that the company encouraged, which was beyond just donating money and giving away money, is that they encouraged their employees to be actively involved in healthcare and education. Company employees served on the hospital boards. Company employees served with the foundation and on the foundation boards. So it was that trust and that bond of respect that was developed between the industry and the healthcare system here that brought us to where we are today. And it's quite an achievement when you look back at it, to think that a group of employees working in an industrial setting, together with their company who pledged to match whatever money was donated, would get together today to build a healthcare facility such as the one we have. I don't think that would happen today. But that trust was there, and it's something that we should all be very, very proud of.
The employees also made a pledge on a 50-50 draw in later years that existed up until the company's closure.
Yes, there were many activities in which the company participated, both on a weekly basis or a yearly basis. One of the major ones, of course, was the establishment of the first 50-50 partnership with the South and Central Health Foundation. So for every dollar that the company employees contributed to the foundation would be matched by the company. So that started out slow, but it certainly developed into a very long-term project, which existed up until the time the company eventually closed here.
On July the 11th, 1960, MHA R.W. Guy turned the sod to start the construction of a new hospital and nurses' residence. On March 13, 1961, the first board of directors were appointed for the new Central Newfoundland Hospital under the chairmanship of C.J. Bond. On September the 2nd, 1963, the Central Newfoundland Hospital was opened by Premier J.R. Smallwood. Premier Smallwood, as seen in the picture, turning the key to the hospital over to Board Chairman C.J. Bond. Dr. J.F. Brown would become its first medical staff president. Coming up is the anniversary of the Central Newfoundland Hospital that was built in 1963. I understand that you were one of the first chairs of the board of directors at the hospital. I believe, you can correct me, was it 1971?
No, I started I was on the board from 1973 to 82. I was the chair from 81 to 82.
How were you elected to the board back in the early days?
Back in the early days, when all the start, as you recall, the hospital, where the Lady Northcliffe Hospital was here before, and when there was a movement for a new hospital, it was through public payroll deductions at the mill and various other places. So a lot of the money was raised locally for the hospital. And because of that, the board of directors was made up of representatives from all of the municipalities in the region. For instance, there were representatives from Millertown, Badger, Windsor, Grand Falls, Bishops Falls, Botwood. And the bigger centres like Windsor and Grand Falls had 2 representatives, and all the rest had 1 representative. And they were appointed by the municipal government. They weren't appointed by government. The town of Windsor appointed 2, the town of Grand Falls appointed 2, the town of Millertown appointed 1, etc. So it was truly a regional representative board. And it turned out, as far as I was concerned, that it's a very good way to represent the board. Shortly after, in the 80s, early 90s, it was changed to the point where it was completely appointed by the provincial government. And of course then there was still somewhat of a regional kind of representation, but it was all appointed by by the provincial government.
What kind of accomplishments did the board make back when you were on the board and when you were chair?
Right at the beginning, all of the physical structures were there, the same as they are now. But we started to reach out into other regions, for instance the South Coast, Harbour Breton, Mozambique, those places, Bay of Spear, Lewisport and Lewisport Clinic. All of that became a part of the Central Newfoundland Hospital Board, and of course Botwood Hospital was a part of it as well. So that's when we sort of spread out into all of Central Newfoundland. The act that governed the hospital at that time was called the Grand Falls Hospital Act, but the hospital was called the Central Newfoundland Hospital because it covered all of Central Newfoundland. And that was one thing that happened when we were there. There's another thing that happened that didn't happen when I was involved with the board was the hospital foundations. They didn't exist at that time. All of the money that was used for purchasing of equipment, etc., was through government budgets. We were given an operating budget. We were given an equipment budget, and of course every year we had to decide if we were going to put an X-ray machine in Bay of Spear or if we were going to put something at the Utumi Hospital, or the Botwood Hospital was called at that time. And so it was different from what we have nowadays, and I've often talked to people involved with the hospital system since then, is that look at all the money that has been raised locally for hospital equipment. And back in the time when I was involved with the board, there was no such thing. Every cent came from government.
The last baby born at Lady Northcliffe Hospital was Robert Philpott, or Bob as he was known, born on June the 8th, 1963, to James and Shirley Philpott. Bob passed away in 2005 at a much too early age of 41. The first baby born at the newly opened Central Newfoundland Hospital was a son to Mr. and Mrs. Reginald Temple of Bishops Falls. In 1966, the Ladies Auxiliary was formed, who helped in the purchase of necessary medical equipment, and also formed the Candy Stripers, who volunteer and help the hospital and patients. In 1972, portable classrooms were added to offer more medical services. Dr. Wolfrey, what year did you arrive at the Central Newfoundland Hospital?
Well, I came here in 1970 after spending 5 years down in Botwood with Dr. Toomey, and I was there from 1965 to 70. And then I came up here, and Dr. Neil Harvey and I went in practice together in 1970. Well, of course, there was a fairly small staff. We had two groups of general practitioners, the Grand Falls Medical Clinic and the Family Practice Clinic. And then there was only one surgeon initially when I came, with Dr. Bob O'Driscoll. And later Dr. Sullivan came and joined him. And of course Dr. Alexander did surgery and obstetrics and general practice. And then we only had one internist, Dr. J. Lee, and one pediatrician, Dr. Jack Crosby, and we had one obstetrician, Dr. Bo Epstein, and a pathologist, Dr. Fisher. So it was a relatively small medical group, but the GPs did practically everything that specialists do now, and there were no emergency room physicians. For example, the GPs covered all that. And we did a lot of obstetrics, and we used the consultants just in a consulting basis. And we looked after patients in ICU, and we looked after a lot of patients on wards. So it was a very taxing and very, very busy practice compared to now, where you have a lot of consultants and a lot of specialists in the hospital. No, each of the hospitals out in the periphery, for example, Botwood and Springdale and Bayvert and Harbour Breton, just to name a few, and they had looked after all their own patients down here, and they did all their own obstetrics in the early 70s, and only the more difficult cases were sent up here. And we didn't have enough specialists to send specialists down to those hospitals, so they would have to come up and see a specialist up here. So and they worked as a autonomous group then, but later on, as you know, the Central Health took in all those hospitals, and there's quite a bit difference now. For example, there's practically no obstetrics done in the small hospitals these days, only on an emergency basis. And then, for example, when I was in Botwood from 1965 to 70, we did 300 deliveries a year. And there was about 1,100 deliveries a year that occurred here in the Central Newfoundland Hospital. And all the other hospitals did their own obstetrics as well. So now everything comes into the Central Newfoundland Hospital. You have much better services, much better, more obstetricians, more pediatricians, and more staff to take care of all these patients from the outside areas.
Thank you, Dr. Wolford.
Okay, thank you.
With the 80s came more challenges. There was an ever-increasing need to offer more and better health services in the central area. In March of 1985, Premier Brian Peckford, along with local MHA, Len Sims, and Mayor Paul Hennessy, turned aside for a major expansion of the Central Newfoundland Hospital. It will be completed in July of 1988. Since the 1985 redevelopment, more health services have been added to the Central Newfoundland Hospital, such as dialysis, CT scan, BMD, along with the state-of-the-art OR suite. Dr. O'Driscoll came to Lady Northcliffe Hospital in 1951. He would leave in 1956 and would return as a young surgeon. Other doctors who followed him in the OR at the Centre Newfoundland Hospital were